Hello, I'm Henrietta Janes. I would like you to know a little bit about my life. I'm a Mormon pioneer, a mother of 9 children, and was exiled from my home at least 3 times. I was born as a New Englander on March 8, 1835 in Mansfield, Connecticut as the only child after my older twin brothers Elijah and Eli Shaw both passed away in their infancy. My parents are Josiah Janes and Asenath Slafter, both of Connecticut. We lived next door to my grandma Eunice Slafter. Here is the 1840 census. My parents joined the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints in 1841, and shortly after we made the arduous journey to Nauvoo, Illinois, where the saints were gathering. I was only 6 years old. I'll never forget meeting Joseph Smith. He shook hands with all, old and young. I cannot remember much that was said that day in the meeting, as I was so very young. I know of a surety that Joseph Smith was a prophet of God. I wrote of Joseph Smith's last dream that he had before he died in Carthage jail. I would later review it with my children and grandchildren. You can see it on FamilySearch.org. We were very sad when my dad Josiah died in Nauvoo within 3 months of the prophet's death. We were poor already, and after that our circumstances were desperate. It was now the 3 of us, Grandma Eunice, Mom, and myself. On September 10, 1846, a militia of 1,000 men attacked Nauvoo. They had guns, cannons, and a singular purpose: drive us from the state. On October 1, 1846, we left. We crossed the Mississippi and waited at the camp of the poor for a month. Food seemed almost non-existent until the miracle of the quail. An abundance of exhausted quail flew into our camp and provided us with sufficient food. God had not forsaken us. We received help to trek west, but they only took us to Garden Grove, Iowa, where we had to wait 9 months. Here are some items I brought with me: my glasses, my journal, and a small treasure box. We finally made it to Council Bluffs, Iowa. Grandma Eunice died there. We crossed the Missouri River to winter quarters in hopes to go to Zion in 1848, but we didn't make the trip for 4 years. My mom married again, to Benjamin Gibson in 1849 after the manner of the Gentiles, but this marriage didn't last long. Here is the 1850 census where my name is listed as Henrietta Gibson. We finally left on June 4, 1852. I walked nearly the entire way, not wishing to impose on my benefactors. I didn't want to make more trouble than necessary. I was 17 years old. We joined the Joseph Outhouse Company. One evening after a long trek without food, I climbed into a tree to be by myself while I cried. One of the men, riding by on his horse, heard me crying, asked me what the matter was. I told him I was very tired and hungry. He gave me a crust of bread. How good that crust of bread tasted! Sometimes we saw buffalo or antelope, and occasionally one was killed for fresh meat, which was a great treat as our supplies were scant. Our cows furnished us plenty of milk and cream. We arrived in the Salt Lake Valley and eventually settled near Cottonwood Canyon in Jehu Cox's fort called Union Fort. I met and married Isaiah Cox in the fort. He was 16 years old and I was 20. He was a skilled carpenter and had an unconquerable spirit. He was hard-working and a good provider. Our first daughter Henrietta was born 11 months later. In 1857, Isaiah helped scare off Johnston's army. I was sure worried for him. He returned, and in 1858 we were sealed in Salt Lake Endowment House. We then moved to Sanpete County. We eventually settled Fairview. My first son Isaiah Jr. was the first baby in Emd Pleasant. He was born in an old covered wagon. Julia was born in Fairview. In 1861, Brigham Young called us on a cotton mission to help settle St. George in southern Utah. We arrived with 300 others. The warmer climate improved my health and vigor. David and Sarah were born in St. George. In 1865, our home became a polygamous home. I gave my consent for Isaiah to marry Elizabeth Stout. She was nervous to meet me after they married. When she came home for the first time, I ran with open arms, gave her a hug and a kiss. I gave her a hearty welcome and we became good friends. For years later he also married Martha Cragan. As the first wife, I had the responsibility of seeing that the household ran smoothly and to keep peace in the home. I had a tender, loving heart and endeavored always to treat everyone with kindness. I told Martha, whenever my heart comes between me and my father's work, it will have to break. If you have not learned that lesson, the sooner you learn it the better for you. Martha said I was a glorious woman. No better ever lived. Israel never produced a better Latter-day Saint. She honored the priesthood her husband held and preserved a perfect peace in his house. She kept our home peaceful and in order. My mother Asenath remained close to the family until her death in St. George on October 5, 1867. We went through so much together. I kept my feelings toward my challenges and trials to myself. St. George's summer heat was unfit for babies. I lost 3 babies in the 1870s and that summer heat may have contributed. George, Eunice, and Willard all passed away about 1 year old. In 1877 the St. George Temple was finished. Isaiah worked hard during its construction. The same month of its dedication, I had Isaiah do proxy work for my father Josiah Janes. Our last baby Artemisia or Misha was born this year. In 1884 Isaiah was called on another mission to help settle the Muddy River in southern Nevada. Here we go again, another move. After the mission, we moved back to St. George. Polygamous life started getting rough around 1887 when new laws led the U.S. Marshals throwing men in jail. It was determined for Isaiah to go escape to Mexico. Elizabeth, Martha, and I didn't want to go, so Isaiah married 2 more younger wives, Mary and Sophia. I moved in with my daughters in Rockville, where I had already been living off and on. My daughters Reddy, Julia, and Sarah all married the same man, David Stout, and it was a pleasure living in their household. Isaiah returned in 1892 and died 4 years later in a farming accident. We weren't living together at the time. I then split time between Hinckley, Utah with David Stout in the summers and St. George in the winters with Misha to work in the temple. In 1898 I almost died of typhoid fever but battled out of it. We moved down to the Mexico colonies in 1908. These were wonderful times of prosperity. Here I am with a 4-generation picture with Joyce. During the Mexican Revolution we got kicked out in the summer of 1912. It was an intense exodus. I was in exile again. Upon leaving Mexico we were allowed to take out just 1 trunk of clothing for their entire family. We made it out alive. El Paso was a very good place of refuge. I went to my son Isaiah's place in Mopa, Nevada. In 1913 I went back to live with my daughter in Hinckley, Utah. As I slowly failed in health, the children tried to make me as comfortable as possible. I died on June 17, 1917 in Hinckley of heart trouble. I had 6 living kids and 40 grandkids. Here is my tombstone that has inscribed, Mother. It is in the Hinckley City Cemetery. I'm Henrietta Janes Cox. I moved from Connecticut to Nauvoo to gather with the saints, then crossed the plains on the Mormon Trail. I helped settle Fairview, St. George and Overton. I was exiled from Nauvoo, Salt Lake with Johnston's army, St. George because of polygamy, and Mexico. Thank you for listening to my story.